Hi, I'm so sorry I'm late. I was inside making one of my delicious homemade pies. If you don't know it already, my name is Amelia Bedelia, and I work for Mr. and Mrs. Rogers. I was so happy that the staff here at Two Story Boarding House invited me to come, and I'm very happy to share one of my favorite stories, actually two of my favorite stories about myself, written by Peggy Parrish. The first one is called Amelia Bedelia, and if you don't know who I am already, this story will explain it to you. Oh, Amelia Bedelia, your first day of work, and I can't be here, but I made a list for you. You do just what the list says, said Mrs. Rogers. Mrs. Rogers got into the car with Mr. Rogers, and they drove away. What nice folks! I'm going to like working here, said Amelia Bedelia. Amelia Bedelia went inside. Such a grand house! These must be rich folks. But I must get to work. Here I stand just looking, and me with a whole list of things to do. Amelia Bedelia stood there a minute longer. I think I'll make a surprise for them. I'll make lemon meringue pie. I do make good pies. So Amelia Bedelia went into the kitchen. She put a little of this and a pinch of that into a bowl. She mixed and she rolled. Soon her pie was ready to go into the oven. There, said Amelia Bedelia, that's done. Now let's see what this list says. Amelia Bedelia read it. Change the towels in the green bathroom. Amelia Bedelia found the green bathroom. Those towels are very nice. Why change them? She thought. Then Amelia Bedelia remembered what Mrs. Rogers had said. She must do just what the list told her. Well, all right, said Amelia Bedelia. Amelia Bedelia got some scissors. She snipped a little here and a little bit there, and she changed those towels. There, said Amelia Bedelia. She looked at her list again. Dust the furniture. Did you ever hear such a silly thing? At my house we undust the furniture, but to each his own way. Amelia Bedelia took one last look at the bathroom. She saw a big box with the words dusting powder on it. Well, look at that, a special powder to dust with, explained Amelia Bedelia. So Amelia Bedelia dusted the furniture. That should be dusty enough. My, how it smells so nice. Draw the drapes when the sun comes in, read Amelia Bedelia. She looked up. The sun was coming in. Amelia Bedelia looked at the list again. Draw the drapes? That's what it says. I'm not much of a hand at drawing, but I'll try. So Amelia Bedelia sat right down and she drew those drapes. Amelia Bedelia marked off about the drapes. Now what? Put the lights out when you finish in the living room. Amelia Bedelia thought about this a minute. She switched off the lights, then she carefully unscrewed each bulb. Amelia Bedelia put the lights out, so those things need to be aired out too, just like pillows and babies. Oh, I do have a lot to learn. My pie, explained Amelia Bedelia. She hurried into the kitchen. Just right, she said. She took the pie out of the oven and put it on the table to cool. Then she looked at the list. Measure 2 cups of rice. That's next, said Amelia Bedelia. Amelia Bedelia found 2 cups. She filled them with rice, and Amelia Bedelia measured that rice. Amelia Bedelia laughed. These folks do want me to do funny things. Then she poured the rice back into the container. Next on the list, it said, the meat market will deliver a steak and a chicken. Please trim the fat before you put the steak in the icebox. And please dress the chicken. When the meat arrived, Amelia Bedelia opened the bag. She looked at the steak for a long time. Yes, she said, that will do nicely. Amelia Bedelia got some lace and bits of ribbon, and Amelia Bedelia trimmed that fat before she put the steak in the icebox. Now I must dress the chicken. I wonder if she wants a he chicken or a she chicken, said Amelia Bedelia. Amelia Bedelia went right to work. Soon the chicken was finished. Amelia Bedelia heard the door open. "The folks are back," she said. She rushed out to meet 'em. "Amelia Bedelia, why are the light bulbs outside?" asked Mr. Rogers. "The list said that, to put the lights out, and it didn't say to bring them back in. Oh, I do hope they didn't get aired too long." "Amelia Bedelia, the sun will fade the furniture. I asked you to draw the drapes," said Mrs. Rogers. I did, see," said Amelia Bedelia. She held up her picture. Then Mrs. Rogers saw the furniture. "The furniture!" she cried. "Did I dust well enough?" asked Amelia Bedelia. "That's such nice dusting powder." Mr. Rogers went to wash his hands. "I say," he called, "these are very unusual towels." Mrs. Rogers dashed into the bathroom. "My best towels," she said. "Didn't I change them enough?" asked Amelia Bedelia. Mrs. Rogers went to the kitchen. "I'll cook the dinner. Where's the rice I asked you to measure?" "I put it back in the container. But I remember it measured 4½ inches, said Amelia Bedelia. "Was the meat delivered?" asked Mrs. Rogers. "Yes," said Amelia Bedelia. "I trimmed the fat just like you said. It does look nice." Mrs. Rogers rushed to the icebox. She opened it. "Lace? Ribbons? Oh, dear," said Mrs. Rogers. "The chicken? You dressed the chicken?" asked Mrs. Rogers. "Yes, and I found the nicest box to put him in," said Amelia Bedelia. "Box?" exclaimed Mrs. Rogers. Mrs. Rogers hurried over to the box. She lifted the lid. There lay the chicken, and he was just as dressed as he could be. Mrs. Rogers was angry. She was very angry. She opened her mouth. Mrs. Rogers meant to tell Amelia Bedelia she was fired, but before she could get the words out, Mr. Rogers put something in her mouth. It was so good. Mrs. Rogers forgot about being angry. "Lemon meringue pie!" she exclaimed. "I made it to surprise you," said Amelia Bedelia happily. So right then and there, Mr. and Mrs. Rogers decided that Amelia Bedelia must stay. And so she did. Mrs. Rogers learned to say undust the furniture, unlight the lights, close the drapes, and things like that. Mr. Rogers didn't care if Amelia Bedelia trimmed all his steaks with lace. All he cared about was having her there to make lemon meringue pie. Wasn't it a wonderful story written about me? Peggy Barish does such a nice job about telling the silly things I do in my life. The next book I'm going to read is called Play Ball, Amelia Bedelia. It's about a time I played ball with the neighborhood boys. Oh, you're going to love it. Amelia Bedelia walked by the baseball field. The Grizzlies team was there. "I never saw such a gloomy faces," said Amelia Bedelia. "Did something terrible happen?" "We play the Tornadoes today," said Jimmy, "and Donnie has the measles. There's no one to take his place," said Tom. "What about me?" said Amelia Bedelia. "You?" said the boys. "Great! But I don't know much about the game," said Amelia Bedelia. "I will explain it to you," said Tom. "The idea of the game is to hit the ball and to run to each of the bases. The other team tries to get the ball and tag you out." "That's easy enough," said Amelia Bedelia. "Maybe we should warm her up at bat," said Bob. "Good idea," said Tom. "Amelia Bedelia, you hit the ball when Bob throws it." "All right," she said. Bob pitched the ball, but Amelia Bedelia missed it. "No, no," said Tom. "You must step in to meet the ball." Bob pitched the ball again, and Amelia Bedelia stepped in to meet it. "Ouch," she said. "This game hurts." The boys taught Amelia Bedelia how to bat. Later she said, "All right, I'm all warmed up. In fact, I'm hot." "Then be here at 2 o'clock," said Jimmy. "The game starts then." Amelia Bedelia went home. She went right up to the attic. "I know there's a uniform here," said Amelia Bedelia, and there was one. She took a nip here and a tuck there. Soon that uniform was just right. That's done, said Amelia Bedelia. Now what should I do until it is time to go? Then she saw the cookie jar. It's empty, she said. Well, I'll soon fix that. Amelia Bedelia put some of this and a bit of that in the bowl. Amelia Bedelia mixed and she rolled. Soon her cookies were all baked. There now, she said, that's done. Amelia Bedelia looked at the clock. My goodness, she said, I better be on my way. Amelia Bedelia got her things and went to the ballpark. Here she is, here's Amelia Bedelia, called the Grizzlies. Then let's play ball, said the Tornado. The Tornadoes are up first, said Tom. Amelia Bedelia, so you stand here. Catch the ball if it comes your way. All right, she said. Batter up, called the pitcher. The pitcher threw the ball. The batter hit it. He ran to first base. Get the ball, Amelia Bedelia, yelled Tom. Tag Jack before he gets to second base. I must have a tag in here somewhere, said Amelia Bedelia, and she tagged Jack. Another boy came up to bat. He hit the ball. The ball landed near Amelia Bedelia. Throw it to first base, yelled the boys. Put Dick out. So Amelia Bedelia threw the ball to first base. Then she ran and grabbed Dick. How far out do you want him? She called. Amelia Bedelia, shouted the boys. Put him down. So Amelia Bedelia put Dick down. You sure do change your minds fast. You told me to put him out. Dick got back on first base, and the game went on. The next batter missed the ball. The catcher threw the ball to the pitcher. The pitcher missed it. But Amelia Bedelia caught it. Hooray, Amelia Bedelia, throw the ball, shouted the boys. Dick is trying to steal second base. Steal second base, said Amelia Bedelia. That's not nice. Amelia Bedelia ran and picked up second base. It's all right now, fellas, she called. Second base is safe. For gosh sakes, Amelia Bedelia, said the boys, put that back. Amelia Bedelia looked puzzled. But he was going to steal it, she said. It's all right to steal bases, said Tom. That is part of the game. Oh, said Amelia Bedelia. Finally, the Tornadoes were out. They had made 2 runs. It was the Grizzlies' turn at bat. Tom was first. He struck out. Then Jimmy had his turn. He hit the ball hard, and he made it to third base. Next, it was Bob's turn. He hit the ball. Pop fly, called the pitcher. I've got it. Pop fly, said Amelia Bedelia. I didn't hear anything pop. Then it was Amelia's turn. Come on, Amelia Bedelia, said Bob. Make a base hit so Jimmy can come in. Which base should I hit, she asked. Tom said, just hit that ball and run to first base. All right, said Amelia Bedelia. And that is just what she did. Jimmy scored for the Grizzlies. The team cheered. The next player struck out. The Tornadoes were at bat again. The score was Tornadoes 2, Grizzlies 1. The Grizzlies called a timeout. Amelia Bedelia is not very good in the field, said Jimmy. She gets all mixed up, said Tom. Maybe she could be catcher, said Bob. The boys turned to Amelia Bedelia. You be the catcher, said Jimmy. What do I do? Said Amelia Bedelia. Stand behind the batter and catch the ball, said Jimmy. Then throw it back to the pitcher. So Amelia Bedelia stood behind the batter. The pitcher threw the ball. The batter was about to hit it, but Amelia Bedelia pushed him out of the way. And Amelia Bedelia caught the ball. I got it, fellas, she called. The whole team groaned. The Tornadoes were very angry. Put her someplace else, they shouted. Put her way out. So the Grizzlies put Amelia Bedelia way out in the field. The game was not going well for the Grizzlies. The score was Tornadoes 8, Grizzlies 5. The Grizzlies were at bat. It was the last inning. They had 2 outs. The bases were loaded, and Amelia Bedelia was at bat. The Grizzlies were worried. Please, Amelia Bedelia, they said, please hit the ball hard. Amelia Bedelia swung at the first ball. She missed. She swung at the second ball, and she missed again. Please, Amelia Bedelia, please, shouted the Grizzlies. Amelia Bedelia swung at the next ball, and oh, how she hit that ball. Run, Amelia. Run, yelled the boys. Run to first base. Amelia Bedelia ran to first base. Tom says, stealing is all right, she said. Tom says stealing is all right. So I'll just steal all the bases. I will make sure the Grizzlies win. Amelia Bedelia scooped up first base and second and third. Home, shouted the boys. Run home, Amelia Bedelia. Amelia Bedelia looked puzzled, but she did not stop running, and on her way she scooped up home plate too. The boys were too surprised to say anything. Then Tom yelled, we won the game. Amelia Bedelia, come back, shouted the boys. We won. But Amelia Bedelia was running too fast to hear. She did not stop until she reached home. That is a silly game, she said, having me run all the way home. Suddenly she heard a loud roar. Hooray, hooray, hooray for Amelia Bedelia. There were the Grizzlies. We won. The score was Grizzlies 9, Tornadoes 8, said Jimmy. You saved the game, Amelia Bedelia. I'm glad I could help you boys out, said Amelia Bedelia. Maybe we should keep Amelia on our team, Bob said. She could be our scorekeeper. I would be happy to keep your score, said Amelia Bedelia. I have a nice box with a lock on it. Your score would be safe with me. The boys laughed. You will never learn baseball, said Tom. Now can we please have our bases back and our home plate back? You sure can, said Amelia Bedelia. Amelia Bedelia went inside. She looked at home plate. Now what kind of home would use a plate like that, she said. But it isn't polite to return an empty plate. I will have to do something. Amelia Bedelia looked at the cookies. That's it, she said. Amelia Bedelia piled home plate with cookies. Here you are, fellas, she said. The boys quickly emptied home plate. Those are the best cookies I ever ate, said Jimmy. Maybe Amelia Bedelia will never learn baseball, said Tom, but she sure can cook. Hooray for Amelia Bedelia! Hooray for her cookies, shouted the boys. Then the boys went on their way. And Amelia Bedelia went in to bake. That cookie jar was empty again. And that reminds me, I have a lemon meringue pie in the house cooking, and it's getting mighty cold out here. I think it's going to snow. So I'm going to let you guys go. See you later.
Oh boy, it sure does get cold in Port Huron in the winter. Well, I guess nobody here. I might as well have a seat and see if I can have some fun reading a couple of books while I wait and see if they show up. Oh, let's see, what do we have here? Snip, Snip, Snow. Nancy Poydar, the author. Sophie thought it would never snow. The trees were bare, the ground was hard, the air was crisp, but there was no snow. When Sophie went outside, she had to wear a heavy jacket, mittens, and her hood, but there was no snow. Noses were chilly, cheeks were rosy, you could see your own breath, but there was no snow. No snow, Sophie said as she stomped into the house after school. It's nice without snow, said Sophie's mom. No snowballs, said Sophie. No snow on the walk, Mom said. No snow on the sledding hill, Sophie complained. No shoveling, Mom added. No snowman, Sophie grumbled. One evening, the weatherman forecast snow. Snow, sighed Mom. Snow, squealed Sophie. Snow, snow, snow. I'm afraid snow's in the forecast, announced Sophie's dad. We know, said Mom. We know, said Sophie. Sophie put her boots by the door. She put her sled by her boots. She put out a carrot, a box of raisins, and a hat. Don't forget the broom, said her mom. Don't forget the scarf, said her dad. It looks like you're going to have your snow. Sophie could hardly eat, but she did. Sophie could hardly sleep, but she did. In the morning, though, when she looked outside, the ground was still bare. "Where's my snow?" "Your storm has stalled," said her dad. "We might not get it at all." Sophie thought her mom and dad looked a little too happy. At school, Sophie asked if they could make their own snow. "Please, please, please," she begged. Mrs. Bloom let Sophie give everyone a stack of white paper and scissors. They folded and snipped, and folded and snipped some more. Each snowflake was a surprise. No two were alike in the whole classroom. Sophie even made an extra snowflake to take home later. "Look at our floor," sighed Mrs. Bloom. "We made it snow in here," cried Sophie. "Time to clean up," said Mrs. Bloom. "Time to plow and shovel," Sophie mumbled. Sophie made a paper snowman out of the scraps by her chair. "I'm recycling," she told Mrs. Bloom. Sophie taped her snowman to the window. "Oh," she said as she peered outside. "Snow!" Teeny tiny flakes were wafting through the gray sky. Teeny tiny flakes were falling through the bare branches. They softly settled on the swings and the slide. They softly settled on the school steps and the windowsill. "Shh," said Mrs. Bloom as she opened the window a little. "Hear how quietly they fall?" On the way home, the snow came faster. Sophie caught the flakes on her mittens. No two were alike. They were beautiful. "Snow!" she yelled to her mom. "I know," her mom said. "Shh," whispered Sophie, and she held the door open. "Hear how quietly they fall?" "There's going to be plenty of snow," said her mom. "Enough for snowballs?" asked Sophie. "Enough for your boots," said Mom. "Enough for sledding?" squealed Sophie. "Enough for your snowman," Mom said. And the next morning, there was. And that is Snip, Snip, Snow with Nancy Poydar. And if you happen to see this book, there is even a way you can learn to make your own little snowflakes and snowmen right in the back of the book. So you might want to check that one out at your school library. Well, nobody has arrived yet, so I think maybe I'll start my second book and try to stay warm here on the porch. I wish somebody had some hot chocolate. Well, if I get through this book, maybe I'll go get some. Mr. Putter and Tabby Catch the Cold by Cynthia Rylant. Mr. Putter and his fine cat Tabby loved the snow. It made them feel so cozy. Mr. Putter made warm tea and warm muffins. He lit a fire, and he and Tabby watched the snow fall. One day, Mr. Putter went out in the snow without his hat. He wanted to read the funnies in the newspaper so much he forgot his hat. When he came back in, he said to Tabby, "Tabby, I forgot my hat. Hope I don't catch a cold." Tabby sat on Mr. Putter's head to keep him warm while he read the funnies. She tried to help him not catch a cold. She did her best. But Mr. Putter caught one anyway. The next day he was sneezing and coughing, and he felt miserable. "Colds aren't so much fun when you're old," he said to Tabby. Mr. Putter was a boy. He almost liked colds. He always got spoiled. His mother brought him warm soup and minty tea and adventure books. Mr. Putter loved adventure books, but now he was old. He was old with a cold, and he had no one to spoil him. Suddenly, Mr. Putter's phone rang. He picked it up and said, "Achoo!" "Mr. Putter?" someone said. It was Mrs. Teaberry, Mr. Putter's good friend and neighbor. "I caught a cold," said Mr. Putter. "Oh, my goodness," said Mrs. Teaberry. "I'll be right over." "Oh, no," said Mr. Putter. You shouldn't come over, Mrs. T-Berry. You might catch my cold, and it's not good to be old with a cold. Tabby rubbed against Mr. Putter to try and help him feel better. Achoo! Went Mr. Putter in Tabby's face. She decided she'd just stay on his lap. You need someone to look after you, said Mrs. T-Berry. I'll be fine, said Mr. Putter. You need someone, Mrs. T-Berry said. I'll be fine, said Mr. Putter. You really need someone, said Mrs. T-Berry. I'll really be fine, said Mr. Putter. I'll send Zeke, said Mrs. T-Berry. What? Said Mr. Putter. 20 minutes later, there was a scratching at the door. It was Mrs. T-Berry's good dog, Zeke. He had a thermos strapped to his back, and he was wagging his tail. Thank you, Zeke, said Mr. Putter, patting Zeke's head. Zeke wagged his tail and went home. Mr. Putter and Tabby looked inside the thermos. Chicken soup, said Mr. Putter. Hooray! Tabby purred. She loved chicken soup. Mr. Putter and Tabby were having their soup when there was another scratching at the door. It was Zeke again. He had another thermos strapped to his back. Thank you, Zeke, said Mr. Putter. Zeke wagged his tail again and went home. Mr. Putter and Tabby looked inside the thermos. Peppermint tea with honey sticks, said Mr. Putter. Yippee! Tabby purred because she loved honey sticks. Mr. Putter and Tabby ate their soup and drank their tea. Mr. Putter was feeling much better, but he wished he had one more thing. He felt so selfish, but he couldn't help it. He phoned Mrs. T-Berry. Mrs. T-Berry, the soup and the tea are wonderful, he said. Wonderful, said Mrs. T-Berry. But, said Mr. Putter. But, asked Mrs. T-Berry. Would you perhaps have, asked Mr. Putter. Would I perhaps have, said Mrs. T-Berry. An adventure book, asked Mr. Putter. Of course, said Mrs. T-Berry. You do, asked Mr. Putter. Yes, I do, said Mrs. T-Berry. But the book really belongs to Zeke. Zeke, asked Mr. Putter. Mrs. T-Berry said, it's about a brave dog. It's Zeke's favorite book. Mr. Putter said, do you think he'd loan it to me? Only if he gets to come along, said Mrs. T-Berry. Zeke is very attached to his book. Mr. Putter thought about it. The adventure book came with Zeke attached. Could he manage Zeke and a cold? Would Zeke be good? Or would he be Zeke? Mr. Putter was desperate. Of course Zeke may come with his book, said Mr. Putter. Wonderful, said Mrs. T-Berry. A few minutes later, there was a scratching at the door. It was surprising. It was amazing. Zeke was good. Zeke was fine. Zeke was perfect, as long as you were reading his adventure book to him. Mr. Putter and Tabby and Zeke curled up in Mr. Putter's bed and read all day long. Mr. Putter sounded a little funny with his stuffed nose, but Zeke and Tabby didn't mind. They wanted to hear about the brave dog. Mr. Putter read and read while Tabby purred and Zeke wagged. And when the brave dog's story was over, they all snuggled up and went to sleep, full of soup and tea and adventure. It was the best cold Mr. Putter had ever caught. And that is Mr. Putter and Tabby Catch the Cold. Well, I think maybe before I catch a cold, I better go find some hot chocolate since nobody has come home to let me in yet. I hope you've enjoyed the books, and we look forward to having you stop by Two-Story Boarding House again. I hope next time it'll be a little bit warmer and it'll be springtime, and we'll be talking about flowers and kites and things like that. Talk to you all later. Thanks for being with us.